Hi, I'm Dr. Daniel Hampikian, working out of the Games Interactive Media and Mobile Technology program, or GIMM, at Boise State University. And I'm going to just do a brief tutorial on the Ionic 6 framework for developing cross-platform apps, so apps that can run on iOS, on Android, on desktop, or in a web browser. And do so with one single code base, so you don't need a new language for each different device that you want to deploy your code to. You just have one coding language and you deploy to whatever device you and your users want. So first, let's just do some theory. What is Ionic? And we're using Ionic version 6, the latest version. So it is a framework, in other words, a set of tools and languages and other frameworks that it relies upon that allow us to very quickly build apps that can deploy to any kind of device or a web browser or everything we want it to deploy to. It's built on top of several other frameworks, and the first one is Node.js, which strictly speaking isn't a framework. It's a runtime, a JavaScript runtime that allows JavaScript developers, web developers, to access and run code on the computer's processes itself, so on the computer process, not just on the browser. And this allows us to do all kinds of things, like write server-side applications, so applications that you couldn't run with just plain vanilla JavaScript, that run on the server and deliver code to the client. One of the things that Node.js is used for is to build other frameworks. So React and Angular are two examples of that. The Angular framework, and in particular the Angular framework and TypeScript, are another framework that Ionic's built on top of. And so Angular is a web-based framework that, again, allows you to deploy to desktop or web, not so much mobile devices like iOS and Android. And what Angular is great for is it allows us to overcome a lot of the limitations of vanilla JavaScript and do so by using more powerful, more reusable, and more flexible, scalable code, where you code in these modules or chunks of code. So instead of a browser going and reading all the JavaScript files at once, it only pulls in the modules of code it needs and runs those. We import them and export them as needed. Angular also uses TypeScript, which is a superset of JavaScript. So in other words, it can do everything JavaScript can do, but it comes with some superpowers, some abilities that JavaScript does not have. One of those is that it's strictly typed. So it is a language that's much more like C#, if you're familiar with that. In fact, it's also developed by Microsoft, and so it keeps the types of variables statically fixed. So if you make an error, you see that in the compiler debugger instead of trying to figure out a logic error at runtime. Now, the other thing that Angular allows us to do is run a local version of our code, so we can see as we make changes to our code, those changes happen immediately in the browser. And this makes testing a lot easier. Because it's built on Node.js, we have these chunks of code, and these modules, as we're going to call them, are also common to Ionic. So one of the things that Angular and also Ionic allows us to do is to limit the things like the CSS variables, the HTML, to these folders where so we can change things only within the folders where we want them changed and not outside of those folders. So it allows greater organization of the code. And the other thing is it allows us to import via the Node Package Manager, the NPM, so part of Node.js itself, a lot of external libraries. So if we want to access like the geolocation of a phone, we need to import an external library called Cordova that allows us to take JavaScript or TypeScript code, turn it into JavaScript code, turn the JavaScript code into, say we're targeting a Android application, so into Java code, and then that Java code goes and grabs the native camera, so the native operating system, in this case, since it's Android, it would be using Java code, it would grab an Android device's camera and do something with that camera, and then our application can use the camera of a phone. So the important point of all that, if all that sounds like a lot, don't worry, we're going to go through it step by step. The main point I want to bring up at this time is that using Angular and using Ionic allows us to use external libraries as easy as an import statement that we type straight into the command line. The main advantage of using Ionic is, again, its cross-platform advantage. So having one code base is very valuable if you're making apps for a bunch of different platforms like iOS and Android. Saves development time and developer salaries if you're a bigger company. And finally, I want to mention Ionic's capability and Angular's capability as well to develop PWAs. So PWA is a progressive web app, and basically what it is a web page, just a normal web page, but one that functions just like an app in a phone or a tablet. So right down to having an icon, a custom icon like an app does, being able to send push notifications like an app does, being able to access a lot of the native capacities of the device just like an app does. And PWAs are great because for a lot of reasons, right? So for one, they're web development that's mobile first in the greatest sense, right? They're primarily made for mobile. They load very, very fast, much faster than an app usually. They also allow us to make changes to our app without having to go through the App Store and deploy and go through Google Play and deploy and pass all their tests and do product testing with our beta and our alpha test, and then and so instead, if you're kind of a small development team, you can just make the changes in the website, test them out with your team, and then push them directly, because it's just updating a website, to anybody that has a PWA in the phone. Maybe even send them a push notification to let them know there are changes. Okay, so let's get started. So like I said, the Ionic framework relies on these other technologies, so the other frameworks, Node.js and Angular. So we'll actually install Angular alongside of Ionic, but one thing we do need to go and get and install right away is Node.js, and I'll put a link to this install location in the notes for this, or the description for this video. So you can just go ahead and use the window installer to install this, and once that's done, just use all the default command line options. Once that's done, you should be able to click on your Windows key and type Node.js, and what you're looking for, actually just Node, is the Node.js command prompt, and that's not the Node.js app. So Node.js command prompt app is what we're looking for, and when you click on it, it should look like this. Okay, so what we're looking at right here is just a command line interface. It's similar to the interface you would see if you typed command prompt into Windows and hit enter. In that case, you would see a command prompt that looks just like that, except it wouldn't say your environment's been set up for using Node.js with the version, and NPM it would say Microsoft Windows. Either way, what we're doing when we type in a command prompt is we're basically talking directly to our computer's operating system. So usually when you click around on your computer, you're going through a few middlemen to get to your operating system, and then that operating system eventually gets a command from those middlemen, and that command gets pushed back up to the visual interface you're looking at. So in this case, the middleman is the File Explorer, and if I click on, for example, Documents, so at some level, the File Explorer issues a command to our operating system, which gives us this information. That is what the contents of the documents folder is. And then from the command line, it passes that information back up to the middleman, the File Explorer, and the File Explorer visually presents the information. But we can skip all that visual stuff by just typing the commands directly. So that's what I'm about to do. So instead of clicking on the Documents folder, I'm going to type CD and then Documents. CD stands for Change Directories, and Documents is the Documents directory. And you can see the path of the directory I'm at right now is at daniel_npm/documents. So that's C, the users, Daniel_npm documents, right? If I hit LS, we can directly see the information we just saw in File Explorer. And that's just by typing, list the items that are in this directory ls. Okay, so I'm going to change directories again. I'm going to go into GitHub. I'm going to hit ls again to see what's in here. And this is the location I want to be in when I create my Ionic app. But before we do that, we need to go ahead and get some other dependencies. So we actually need to download Ionic. And you can find some instructions for how to do this if you Google the Ionic framework and click on the Getting Started section. We're going to be following the install Ionic through the command line, so we're just going to type this with a few added extra things. And if you're curious about what we're doing here, you can read about it here. I'll go ahead and put this link in the notes as well. Right there. So you can get to it. Okay, so the commands that I'm actually going to run, because I want to install some additional tools to make it easier for cross-platform development, are npm, or Node Package Manager, so npm install, and that's how we're going to access these external libraries using Node, right, using the Node Package Manager. And we're going to get the Ionic command line interface, so the Ionic/CLI, the native run library, and the Cordova res library. And we can just run those. The -G here stands for globally install. If you see some errors in the permission errors here, you might want to open your command, your Node.js command prompt as an administrator. To open something with administrative privileges, let's say I wanted to do it with Google Chrome here, you would right click on it, and if it doesn't show up right here, look for more and then run as an administrator, and you might have to put your password or something in there. So if you get privilege-based errors, and not warnings but errors, and it seems like it did not install anything after you type this command, that's probably what you'll want to do. That'll solve your problem 99% of the time. Okay, so we haven't actually installed anything yet into this folder. We've installed globally some tools. So now if I type Ionic-V, we can see the version of Ionic that I'm using right now, and I must remember to put this in the video notes as well, because Ionic tutorials go out of date very, very quickly. Like Ionic's developers are incredibly fast at pushing new versions, sometimes with monumental changes to the way that code is done, and which is great for a person who teaches it, because it keeps me on my toes. It also keeps them up to date with external code libraries, because remember, they have to stay up to date with iOS conventions, with Android conventions, desktop conventions, and web-based conventions all at once, right? So they have to push a new version at least once a year. And sometimes those come with some pretty major code changes, so it's always good, to check out the version of the Ionic tutorial you're looking at. I am guilty of this, but like a lot of Ionic tutorials out there do not put the version number in the description, and you'll find out you're developing an Ionic 3 app or something like that, and nothing's working. So anyway, Ionic 6 is the version we're using. So if I want to start a new app, the way that I would do it is I would type Ionic Start, and this is going to actually build a whole folder for me, a folder that contains everything I need to start running an app right here in my browser and testing it in my browser, and the beginnings of what I need to make an app for, Android, iOS, desktop, and even to make a PWA, a progressive web app. It's going to generate a bunch of folder structures that make the app already kind of organized. They're going to enforce an order on the way that I code. And this is a really good thing for developers. If you've ever worked with vanilla JavaScript and CSS and HTML with a bunch of other developers, you'll see that without having structures for the way that the folders should be, and that code becomes very rigid and inflexible very rapidly, and communication can be very difficult without a team that's really in sync. And even with yourself over time, right? If you go back to your code a year later, if there isn't an order kind of enforced on the way that you're coding, so anyway, Ionic's gonna develop, Ionic Start is gonna make a bunch of folder structures that are gonna enforce an order on the code, and other things will as well, like the TypeScript strict typing that we'll have to use, the module-based coding that we'll have to do, and the division of labor in the model view component, way that Angular apps in general are done, and Ionic apps are as well. So Ionic Start, and actually, if we just type Ionic Start --help, this is a useful function anytime you are confused about what you can do from the command line, or you forgot the exact order of things, like I frequently do when I'm starting an app, because you don't start apps all that often. Usually you're working on one over time. You can always type --help after an Ionic command, and that includes the command Ionic, and see what your options are and some examples of usage, and they're really good at documenting this in the command line interface. So what I'm actually looking for is a blank app, so I just wanted to make sure that the blank comes after the Ionic Start and app name. So we're going to call our app, let's see, so this is for my Tuesday class, so Ionic Start Tuesday. App is the name of our app, and we're going to start, actually we won't start with a blank template, we're going to start with a template called tabs, and what that's going to do is enable us to have some tabs on the bottom of the app. I'll show you what I mean in just a second. But just as you'd see in any mobile app where you have where your thumb can reach some tabs that switch between pages, it's going to start us with a template that looks like that. So I'm going to type as well --type equals Ionic -Angular, and that is just to specify the type. So I can also have an app that's based in React, an app that is based in Vue, and an app that's just plain vanilla, JavaScript based. But I actually want to use Angular and TypeScript for this, so type equals Ionic -Angular, enter. And we'll get that app going. I'm going to pause the video. Oh, no, I'm going to answer these questions real quick. So it says, do you want to integrate your new app with Capacitor to target native iOS and Android? And I do, in fact. So Capacitor is a large library that they won't add it unless you ask them to. You can always add any of these things or take away any of these things later with npm commands. And as you can see, this is a npm.command that they're running to have Capacitor. Ooh, that's not great. So I see an error already. I'm gonna wait for a second and see what that error is. Okay, so we're seeing a print error. Node sass command fail. But instead of this, type equals Ionic -Angular, I did --type equals Angular, and then --capacitor. So no Ionic in the command, and that was just fine. So I think what it was trying to do is run Ionic 5 commands into an Ionic 6 application, and that was causing problems. It's just a guess, but in any case, this works just fine as a command, and that's all that I did while the video was cut out right there. Okay. So, good. So now if I hit ls, we can change directories into our Tuesday app, and one of the things that I'll be using to modify the code is open it up with Visual Code and install it if you need to. I'll put the install link here. So Visual Code is pretty great for Angular and Ionic. Visual Code, and this is not Visual Studio, so be careful. It's by the same people who do Visual Studio, but it is much more lightweight, and so it doesn't take as much, but you can get it here for free, and it's a really great IDE. So really great code editor / IDE, depending on how much of the external things you want to install. So I'll put the link for that particular install. Once you have that installed, this is one of the things I like about Visual Code, is you can just type code dot into a command line, and it's going to open up the whole Tuesday app folder into Visual Code. I think that's super cool. Atom is another choice you might use, the Atom code editor, and it has a similar command. I think that command is just atom dot. Okay, so this is what Visual Code looks like. So let's just go through the anatomy of these folders that we've made by just typing in a command to the command line interface. Okay, so E2E, these are end-to-end tests. We don't have to worry about this much. Most of the stuff we're going to worry about is in the source folder. That's where all the code goes for the app itself. Everything else around here is external to basically the way the project is made. So node modules are the libraries that we can call on when we need them. And there's a whole bunch of code in there, so you'll notice that they're actually compressed usually until you actually install them. And so source is the main folder. The browser list RC editor config, all these, the Angular JSON, so these are just the dependencies we're going to have, the configuration we're going to have, the Ionic configuration we're going to have, the package lock are all the configuration files locked down to the last npm install, and the package JSON, again, all the things that we would not normally like check into GitHub, but we could install once we got from GitHub. So this makes like the code that we actually have to worry about, and then some TypeScript configuration stuff. None of that stuff's super important for the development. Everything important is inside of this folder right here. So let's talk about all the folders we see here under source, because this is where the real logic of the app is. So because we used a tab template, we have these 3 tab pages, tabs 1, tab 2, and tab 3, and then we have some code that all 3 of these tab pages reuse. So there's a routing module. Routing modules are how you would navigate around in an Ionic app. This is in common to pretty much any Node app or Angular app. So you have a single page application, and the way that information gets into that single page, the user clicks on something, is we import a module into the single page they're looking at. So the way you find the thing to import is called the route. And so this is like the path to the route that we're looking for, and these are the things that we're going to import. So tabs to page module, so these are just all the routes of the tabs page. This is any code that all the tabs pages have to be able to run, so it's just some imports that we'll need to run code. And again, when we see like import here, this might be your first time seeing this kind of stuff. This just means that we're importing a chunk of code that is somewhere else into this page. And then from this page, all those chunks of code follow whatever imports this class that we've made. So tabs module page contains all these imports. And so we're kind of packaging a bunch of imports into the tabs page module so that the tabs can function as, you know, web pages or application pages. The tabs page HTML is the actual HTML that contains, that defines what a tab looks like. So at the bottom of your page, you'll have a triangle, an ellipse, and a square, and they will have labels tab 1, tab 2, and tab 3. The SCSS, if we had any custom styles we wanted to put in that only affected the tabs pages and nothing else, we would put it inside of here. If we had global SCSS, we would put that inside of here. So this would affect everything within the app. That's different than inside of all the tabs pages. And if we wanted SCSS that only affected the first tabs page instead of all the tabs, we would put that inside of here, inside of the tabs folder. So SCSS gets limited to the folder that it's in, and that is a really cool feature because you don't have to deal with like messy CSS that changes all over a complicated website. If we take a look at inside of one tab page, you will see that there is some more routing statements, some module.ts statements similar to the module.ts statements we saw before. There is the HTML itself, but you'll notice it doesn't look like normal HTML. Instead, you're seeing things like ion header, ion toolbar, ion title, and what these are, ion content, title, are what these are ion components. So components are like chunks of HTML and CSS or SCSS and TypeScript, chunks of all three of those that function as a class. For example, we can make our own components, and they've done so right here. There's an App Explorer container that has a name called tabs one page, and if we take a look at what that is just like a page. It is a container, right? So first of all, it's some HTML, and that container has a double bound variable of name. So that just means that the name is going to be supplied by the HTML where this is imported. And then there are some, there's basically a link here, right? And that has its own SCSS, which is defined here. So some things about the alignment of the container, the size of it, the font size. It has its own TypeScript. And so it is importing .explore container, so we can see what that code is right here. And what that is just a constructor, and then the ability to export that all as a class. So from there, we can just import all of that as a chunk of code with a simple HTML call, App Explorer container, tabs one page, as long as in our tab page.ts spec.ts, we know about that Explorer container, so we have to import somewhere into there that Explorer container. So specification TypeScript is like asking what types of things, what classes are we going to need to call. Okay, so let's go ahead and I think I should probably talk about what these super important properties that are outside. So these are where if we wanted like a new page, we could ask it to generate a new page right from the command line. And let me show you the code for doing that real quick. If I can find my command prompt again. Okay, so if I do Ionic generate, or Ionic G for short, page, and then we give that page a name like detail. So we'll make a page we'll make in this like example app a page where you click a button and then you get to see like a detail view, like you have in a lot of different apps where you click on something and then you get to see the details of that thing, right? So that is what we're going to do here. So we're going to generate a page, and as you can see, it made us a bunch of things, and it also made us a folder over here. So we have a route, a routing module defined, and a way of importing that routing module. We have the raw HTML. It has nothing in it yet, but you know, we have a name, a title at least, and then the content that we want in our HTML would go there. We have a local scss that only happens to the detail page, and we have a detail page specifications, and then we have the detail page TypeScript. So any code that we want the detail page to be able to run is going to go into here. And so let's delay talking about that for just a second, but I wanted to show you that you can generate pages that way. If we take a look at the options here for the command line, so if I hit clear and then Ionic G -help, you can see that in general you're going to generate pages, components, like the Explorer container is a component, and directives and services. Those are the most common things. So services we'll look at when we start storing data externally on a database. Templates are another thing I wind up generating a lot. So if you have some code where you substitute in like a variable, and then you do something with that variable, like generate some HTML, and then you have some other variables, and all that has to happen over and over again in your app. You can store all that in like a template, and it's kind of like a component, but just a very specified version of that. And you can see all the commands available with npx ngg -help. So page is the most common by far, though, and you'll notice that we're always giving it options, like if we wanted a component and we wanted the folder structure to be, we want a new folder called contact, and we want the component, the form component, to be in there, we would do that. So what we could have done is Ionic generate page, and if we wanted that inside of a folder called pages, we could do pages/detail. But since we already have the tabs set up and those tabs are not inside of pages, I thought it better to just generate a page this way. Okay, so inside of this, let's go through the rest of the Ionic app components. So we have app routing, and you will notice that when we generated a detail page, it actually added that detail path, which we can refer to later when we want to get to the detail path. It added that to our app routing paths. And so these are all of our app routes. For the tabs module, we're lazy loading the routes. What that means is that unlike we're passing in a specific location like we are for the details page, we're just saying our tabs pages are located in tabs /tabs module, and then we're going to pass in a variable m, where m is the tabs page module. So if we look at tabs module TypeScript, tabs routing mod, you can see that if you put in tab 1, it takes us to a specific location, just like the details page does. So then we get to tab 1 module, right? And again, the variable we get given is going to be the tab 1 is going to be the title of the page. So that's what's going on there. That's why that's a little different than the detail page route, which is just a specific location inside the app. So app component.html, you'll notice, so this is the actual HTML of the app. It's very, very basic, right? It's just Ion app tag, and then inside of that, the Ion router outlet. And everything else gets populated inside at runtime when all this TypeScript code gets compiled down to JavaScript code. All the HTML code gets imported where it's needed, when it's needed, and the same of the CSS code, which gets created by the SCSS code by the precompiler. Okay, app component.scss. This is our global CSS file. This is our app component spec.ts file for testing and things like that. Our app component.ts file is going to be where we put any libraries that we need, or actually app module.ts is where we're going to put any libraries that we need to import. So right now we're just importing like browser module, Ionic module, app routing module, some providers. We're not really using a lot of external things yet, but you'll see when we start using storage and when we start using like the camera, we'll have to import all those things and let the app module.ts know about that as we add those things to our app. So whenever you add an external library to an app, there's two steps, right? One is you need to run an Npm install usually, or an Ionic install --help. Let's see what these options are. Or an Ionic, what is it? Ionic, maybe it's not Ionic. Cordova --help. Let's see, I think it might be Ionic Cordova. Ionic Cordova --help. So completion, SSH start. Cordova's subcommands are build, compile, platform, run, prepare requirements, add, that's what I was looking for. So you can add platforms with Ionic. A lot of times you'll just have an npm install, whatever the library name is, library name, and then --save, and then you can give it like a save parameter to like add Ionic. Let's do one for example of, let's see, what's one that will probably, well, the camera is one we'll definitely wind up using at some point. So let's see here. Give me 1 second, and let me look up the command for this. Okay, so camera is going to be a service, and we will need to start by generating a service. So let me go back to build. Okay. So let's see. So here's what we'll do. At this level right here, I'm going to hit clear. We're going to have to do an npm install, and this is going to be an app capacitor. Because capacitor is the name of the library that allows us to access local APIs. So like the local photo API of an Android's phone, right? So at capacitor, camera. So we're going to install the camera functionality of both iOS and Android at the same time, and also web cameras and desktop cameras with that simple command. And that's not all, though. We need to, so now we'll need to do something with that. And so let's see, we'll want to import probably a service. So before we even look at the app, let's do Ionic G, and we'll generate a service. We'll call this, so we'll make a folder called, service, and we'll make a folder called services. And inside that folder, because we'll have more than one service, let's do photo. So now we have service folder, services folder, and we have a photo service, and they're all pretty kind of bare right now. Okay. Inside of our app module TS now, we need to know about this camera API. So what we'll do, let's see, so what we'll do inside of, so I guess we can just add this now inside of the service file. What we're going to do inside of services, photoservice.ts, we will import the libraries which we've installed, so which are actually up here in node modules under @capacitor. So camera's there now. And the README, always nice to read these, but we're going to skip that for now and hope for the best. See if we can rely on my brain for a little bit, at least until I mess up. So let's import the camera and camera result type. Result type, and the camera source and the photo, and all that's going to come from capacitor slash camera, which, as you'll recall, is the place where we installed the library, right? So capacitor core, let's see what its problem is. Declaration, maybe if we lose that. Let's see, import from actually, it didn't have a problem with lowercase camera, and I think that's because, okay, so this is capacitor. We're importing capacitor from @capacitor slash core. We want lowercase @capacitor slash lowercase again camera capacitor slash camera. Alright. Interpreting, string. Yeah. Sometimes I miss little things. Okay. So @capacitor camera, looks like it's fine with that, except it's telling me we're not using it yet, and that's fine. So the other thing is we can, let's see here. So we can code our take a picture functionality here with just, let's see, let's make an asynchronous code. So the constructor we can leave alone, and then below that let's write some custom code. So public async. So we want an asynchronous bit of code to run while the rest of the app is still running. And let's just do add new photo. And this is how we'll take a photo. So constant captured pic equals await camera.get photo. And then inside of that, we'll do results type camera result type dot URI, because we're going to be testing this on the web at first, so it can be just a link to the location of the picture data, and then source camera source dot camera. These are just the JSON options that the camera expects, and then for quality we'll put 100, so fairly low quality. And then we will put a semicolon at the end of that. Okay, and then let's see here. So that is going to be the the code that allows us to take a picture. And so now this code that's defined in TypeScript needs to be defined elsewhere, needs to be accessed elsewhere. So first of all, in photo services, let me just see if there's anything else I need to do. I don't think so. But let me just double check my notes here. Nope. Okay. So instead, let's make like the tab 2 page our photo page. So in HTML, what we'll want is basically a button. So this is going to go App Explorer container app page. Actually, for now, let me just save this and let's demonstrate the last bit of node functionality I want to demonstrate before we actually start accessing cameras and stuff like that. So if I now type Ionic Serve, and this is going to simplify your life a lot when you're coding, because anytime you make a change in code, you'll immediately see it in a test browser, and then you can see the way that that change looks, whether it breaks anything, where it breaks things, exactly the line number in the code, and you see it immediately. So what happened is it just fired up this browser right here, and we're looking at the tab page. If I hit Control-Shift-I, you'll get a better idea for how this would look on a phone. So iPad Air, let's see, what's an actual phone name? iPhone XR. Okay, so this is how it looks on the iPhone XR. And you can see it's not much going on yet. You can't see the photo service. One thing is not seeing any errors in the console, which is great. So I'll hit Control-Shift-I and just look at the full page of this. I'm going to bring it over here, and as you can see, if I pull this over here and we make a change to the code, so maybe now in tab 2 page, we can see there's nothing there yet, right? So let's make a small change. In the tab 2 page, I'm going to add an Ionic component, so just like Ion title or Ion toolbar, in the Ion content section, I think above the App Explorer container, I'm gonna do a Ion, and we'll do a Fab button. So Ion dash Fab dash button, and that Fab button expects an Ion icon, and that icon, and if you want to see where I'm getting all this stuff, here we go. Okay, so if you look at in the Ionic framework, if you go to the docs, so Ionic framework / docs, you go to components, you can see all the options they have available. So that's the button. The Fab button, floating action point button, is a little bit more interesting because we can kind of drop it anywhere around, and it will, let's see if I can see some examples of this. Might need to make this page bigger somehow. Okay. Anyway, so the Ion Fab button, we can put like vertically, horizontally, and it can expand when you press it to show lots of different options. So in this case, we're just doing an Ion Fab button with an icon. The other cool thing about these buttons is you can give them custom icons. So they like add is the plus icon, arrow forward circle. I don't know what that means, but maybe like it expands out into the forward circle, arrow back circle. Anyway, so we're going to do that, but we're going to give it the icon camera because this is going to be our camera button. So Ion icon, and notice actually while I'm typing this that because there is currently an error in my code, if we take a look at the node command prompt here, and we scroll all the way down, let's see, this is, I think that's the same server. So if I save it, it's going to tell me like, hey, you've got an error, and in fact, here's where the error is exactly, and that is pretty cool, right? And it's also going to, if we take a look at the page that we were looking at, so our test page here of the Ion app, the page is now broken, and if we hit Control-Shift-I and we look at the console, again, we can see the errors that are caught, and it's letting us know exactly where that error is. So it's very useful for debugging to have that console just kind of pulled up. And that can be an error in the TypeScript. It can be an error kind of anywhere in the code. So super useful. Okay, let me see. How are we doing on time? So 53 minutes. All right, let's add in an Ion icon here, and the icon we're gonna add is the camera icon, which, let me just look up the symbol for that. Okay, Ion icon, name equals, and it is just camera. And then we can close that. Really no explanation needed for that. Close the Ion Fab button, and I'm just gonna try and, so you can actually see the code I'm typing. I'm gonna make the test one real small here, and make this real big. Okay. Okay, and then let's see, we have the camera, Ion Fab button should be inside of an Ion Fab, as we just saw. So Ion-Fab, floating action point, and now we define what type of floating action point. We want it vertically on the bottom, as you would expect a camera button to be. Horizontally, let's have it horizontal equals center, as you would expect that, and then slot equals fixed, so that we don't get it moving around. And then this closing tag, because that is the over tag, is going to go down here. So we have that, and then let's Control-A and format document here to just get a nice cleaner look. What I did real quick was Control-A, right-click, format document, or Control-Shift. Is that an F? Control-Shift-F. Looks like a T for me. Okay, so now those errors have gone away. If we take a look at this code over here, we will see that we now have our tab 1 page back up, and if we click on tab 2, we have a little camera thing right down there. The other thing I think it's going to be worth doing is, well, maybe that's good for now. I guess we would want a maybe like a button at the bottom. So source.apps tabs page. So in the tabs page itself, what they should maybe all have in common here is in tabs page HTML, we can change the label of this one from tab 2 to photos, and let's see, tab, we can leave the button tab 2 because that has more to do with routing. The name for the icon, let's change to images, so it actually has that camera, so it looks like it's photos, and we can leave the rest alone. And I think that's all we'll need for now. So let's see. For taking photos now, so we have a button, it doesn't do anything yet. So the way that code works is that in HTML and TypeScript, when they're clustered in Angular modules like they are in Ionic, is the tabs 2-page typescript after the constructor. So the constructor will need to know about anything that we're going to use in the code itself. So, and the import, we also want to go ahead and import any library that we're going to use. So we know we're going to use photo service, that library that we ourselves made, so that chunk of code in that library. And then in the constructor, we're going to have to tell it that we want a publicly accessible photo service, variable name photo service, which is of type photo service. In other words, we need a photo service chunk of code to play around with. And let's call this add photo. And what we'll do here is just say this dot photo service. And just like it's an object with its own function, or a class with its own functions, we're going to call our add new photo function, which we defined down in photo service. So now, the HTML just needs to know that it has to call this add photo function, which calls this add new photo service. So to do that in the HTML of the, not the tabs page, but of the tab 2 page HTML, where we have that camera icon button, in the Fab Button, Ion Fab Button, before the icon itself, we can put our click call, just like you would in JavaScript, slightly different syntax, and then we just like an onClick in JavaScript, we would add photo. We just write the name of the function in there, close it out, that's it, and save it. Okay. And so now, without even like reloading the code, we can we should reload the code here. So if I click the camera button, it is trying to open something. So what happens if I open that? So it's popping up my add photos opening something. I wouldn't have expected that. So let me take a look at the code that I wrote in photo service. So add new photo, and then in photo service, what does that do? Services. Constant cap picture await camera dot get photo. Okay, so not much of a hint there. Let me hit Control-Shift-I, and unable to load PWA camera modal. Okay, so what we'll need to do to test this in the web browser is add PWA elements. So camera.getPhoto, for instance, is a PWA element. So all we'll do is just import those real quick, and we can do that in the command line. So I will actually shut down the Node.js terminal here. Or actually, better idea is bring over another command prompt. So while that terminal is running, I can cd to Tuesday app, and let's run that npm install Ionic PWA elements. And then we're all good there. And so now, and then we might have to import something. So depending on your framework of choice, import the element loader. So an Angular Ionic PWA element loader. Okay, it might be fine. Let's see if it added that by default into our app module. So we have app components. Not yet. Okay. So let me see here. I'm gonna go back for a second. So depending on your app of choice, we'll have to modify. Okay, so we need to import custom elements, and this is in main.ts. All right. So in main.ts, scss, which is main.ts. We will want to import and define custom elements, and this is going to be from at Ionic /pwa elements /loader. Define custom elements, and then after the platform's been bootstrapped, platform bootstrap app module. So after here, we're going to define custom elements, and we'll do it to window. Okay, so that's just because we're testing it in the web, and so that we can eventually deploy this as a PWA. So let's go back now to this, and we pull it over. So if I click here, yes, awesome. Okay, so now it's asking if you can use my camera. My desktop camera my computer's actually shut right now, and I'm looking at this on a monitor screen. So we're taking a picture of the inside of my computer, but that's okay. It's enough to kind of illustrate the purpose. So the camera's popping up, and we can even click on image files and put an image file in there, or we can take a picture, click check, and we're not doing anything with that picture yet, but that for me is pretty cool by itself. In fact, I wonder if I can change the camera up here in my settings so that we can look at this through a camera, which I'm plugging in right now, and hopefully it doesn't break everything. Okay. So here, let's see if it automatically picked that up. Yeah, okay, cool. So hi, and let's take a picture. There we go. Okay, so camera functionality is working. Pretty cool. Eventually we'll store those pictures somewhere and send them to a database and do stuff with them. But for now, I just wanted to illustrate how you can tap into the web as well as a native Android or iOS library. And I'm yet to prove that you can do that. That takes a little more effort to get that running, but all of that is quite true, I assure you. Okay, so now that that's done, there's one last thing I wanted to go over before I draw this tutorial to a close, which is, so tab 1 is the first page that we see. Inside of tab 1 page, in the HTML, let's put just a normal button. So that's going to be here. We'll do ion dash button, and let's save this. For this button, let me take a look here. What kind of cool options can we use? So I'm just looking at the button components. Let's use a round button. How about that? We use round, and we'll use a custom color just to make things kind of interesting. So ion button shape equals round, color equals secondary, and then expand equals block. So we'll just have a kind of a big button, and we can do what else? We can do maybe an icon inside. So we can do ion-icon, and in that ion icon we'll do slot equals icon, oh my goodness, icon dash only, and name for the icon, we'll do a star icon for this. Okay, and we can even do size equals large. Let's make sure I didn't forget to use quotations for all that. Okay. And we'll call this page home page. And the name here, we'll just call it home. So the Explorer container, remember, is this chunk of code that actually defines the name that gets sent to the tabs, the shared code for all the tabs. And so when tabs page.html creates its tab, it has this Explorer container where where's tabs? There we go. It has this this label here, right? So we can first of all call this homepage, but then the Explorer container as well passes in a label. So we're gonna change it in both places. And for the name triangle, I wonder if home is an actual icon. Let's see. Let's see what happens. Oh yeah, look. Okay, so homepage, we have this big star button, and right now if we click it, it does nothing. But let's make it take us to our detail page. Okay, so what we'll do to get to the detail page is inside of our tabs 1 page HTML, where we have this button. So inside of Ion button, we'll put a router link, and this has to go inside of these. So router link. And we're going to set that equal to the path that's defined in modules HTML of details. Okay, so we have so far just a big old star button that doesn't quite do anything. So what we're going to do now is make that take us to a details page, and we're going to do this taking advantage of the router link functionality, and we might actually have to import something for this to work into the TypeScript, but for now let's just type the name of the router link, which is detail, and we can double check that in the actual routing component here. So if we look at app routing, there is our detail path, which actually takes us to the detail module. So what we'll need is just a backslash, and this actually needs to be inside of these bindings, and we need commas inside of here. Okay, so that's a lot of syntax, but that should work. And the other thing we'll need to do is, let's see, I think our login, no, that should be enough actually. So if I save this, and then now if we click on this, yeah, we get to the detail page. Just to verify that, let's make a change in the detail page. So let's see, what type of content haven't we used yet? You know, we could actually just put a back button in here. So let's do that. So we'll do a div ID equals container, just a normal div to illustrate that we can in fact do normal HTML code. And with strong emphasis, let's have a back, question mark, and then we will have a break, and then we'll put our ion button for going back there, and we'll have a click function, which will actually, just to illustrate another way of doing routing, which is calling a function that reroutes you. So we'll define a go back function, and we'll define that function in the TypeScript of the detail page. That's where all our functions go. So after ng on init, what we'll do is, first of all, our constructor needs to have a router, and we actually need to import router into this as well. So if we import our router, and that is from Angular router at Angular /router. Now in our constructor we need a router, and this can be private. So private router of type router. And now we can just define the go back function, which is just going to do this.router.navigate. And again, it's this syntax of the binding square brackets and then backslash, and then wherever we want to go back to. So I've already forgotten where that was. Oh, tab 1 page. So that's going to be tab. Here, let's just check how this is defined in the actual tabs module. So tabs routing. The path is path tabs, path 1, so tab 1. Tab, and so on details page, so this is just tab 1. Save, and that should be good. Okay, no errors, that's good. You can see that button doesn't look real great. So what I want to do is, and again, this is nice to illustrate just some scss that's only going to affect the details page. So in our tagged container, we can text align center. We can, so just normal CSS, right? Position, absolute, absolute. And from the top, we can say 50%. So from the transform, let's do a translate y at -50%. And then when we have the container strong, tag, we can set the font size up to like 22 pixels, the line height to maybe like 26 pixels, and for our container P, same thing. Additionally, let's set margin to 0, and then for the container, oops, for things that are tagged as container and are also a link, we will do text decoration. And maybe we can do, so let's see, how do we have this organized? In our HTML, we have a container, and then a break, and then an ion button. And okay, so so that's fine. So let's take a look now, and we at least have a centered button. I might want to put back inside of here. And let's get rid of this stuff, as it's not really doing much. Okay, so back, and you can see it's kind of stuck up in the ceiling there. So let's add margin 30. And some padding. 30 pixels, 20 pixels. And that should push it down or not. Okay. Oh, this is just, should happen just at the container level. And I don't think we need this transfer actually. So let's see here. There we go. That's what I want. Okay, so when we click back, we're getting errors. Let's see what those errors look like. And cut error, tab 1 doesn't match a route. Okay, that's fine. So it's not finding tab 1, but it knows to call that. So from that, we can tell that our TypeScript function here is trying to call this.router.navigate. With the name tab1, but that is not enough to get back to it because it's not a normal page. So let's see, if we take a look inside of our tab1 page routing, and we look at the module, tab1 routing module, we look at the routing module. This is tab1 page from /tab.page, and so if we look at the tabs themselves, they have their own routing module. So the path from when we call tab1 gets to this module and then puts in m.tab1 page module. Okay. So that should be okay. So we probably want tabs /tab1 for the path because it's a children of tabs. So let's try that. Tab1 page and detail TypeScript. So tabs /tab1. And let's start that out with a slash like that. Now if we click that, perfect, we get right back to the page. Okay, so we have two pages. So that's kind of interesting, right? The way that children of overpaths in in route modules are now defined is like this. So we know that the tabs page, which is a common module to all tabs pages, we know that its route is defined as in app routing as the parent of the tabs pages themselves. So really we just have tabs /tabs.module. And so if we want to get to a specific tab page, we want to go to tabs / and then tab1 page, right? So unlike the detail page, which we can get to directly, we can't just say /tabs, like we can say detail, right? This path, we need to specify a little bit more information. We need to say which of the children we're going to. So that's what happened right there. Okay, so that's already a lot, just the basics of navigation in Angular and Ionic actually. how to set up a Ionic browser that loads your pages live, how to set up PWA elements so you can test things out on the web, like this camera. And those things can also be tested from a iOS or Android device, as we'll see later. How to preview how it's going to look in an iOS or Android device right from the web browser as an emulator. And you can also debug. We learned through the console how to start a new project, how to set up Ionic using the command line interface, some basic command line interface tools. And if you want to kill, by the way, after you're finished developing for a while, if you want to kill the process that's running, which is actually a pretty heavy process on your operating system, just hit Control-C twice and that auto-compiler. So now you'll see it's lost some of its functionality. At least it shouldn't let me tap into the camera. It still is. That's kind of weird. But it's throwing errors now, right? And so you can't just shut down the browser. You have to actually Control-C until you stop the compiler itself. I think if you just close the terminal like that, it'll also shut that off. As always, remember to set up a repo here. So you can set up a repo right from Visual Code if you want. I'm not sure I've been over this yet in the current class I'm teaching, but if we just type a message and let's check in all our changes, hit enter, let's publish a branch, and we can allow Visual Studio Code to use GitHub. And then we can publish to a GitHub public repository called Tuesday app, just like that. And just like that, I've committed code to a new branch, which we can view on GitHub. So if we go to my GitHub repo now, you can see the code that I just typed. If we just look in my repositories, there's the Tuesday app. And this is a TypeScript file. So one of the things, it's by default actually got a nice way of handling, so the node modules didn't get checked in, which is great. So it already knows that it's not supposed to check those in. So if you're grabbing this code and you just want to download it and run it, make sure you download it, and then as soon as you get it in your browser, you open up a Node.js command prompt, you cd to the location, right? So the location of the folder at the root directory. So if you hit ls, you should see this. And then you want to run npm install to install all the node packages, which are not by default installed. That would be a lot of stuff to move back and forth that you can just type npm install at either end to do. So instead of moving that data around, we just keep it packaged into little download sections. And once you've done the npm install, you should be able to just do Ionic Serve and fire up the app right where it was. And you can also do code dot if you have Visual Code set up. If you want to work on your own copy of this, remember, instead of cloning this code, you can fork it, and then you can basically just have your own branch that is going to be parallel to mine, but you won't be able to pull new changes I make if they override your changes. But that can be a nice way to kind of get started and call the app something else and have your own repo set up. So the difference between forking and branching is with forking, you're actually getting a copy of the repo in your own repo settings. And from then on out, changes you make are your changes to it. Instead of making a clone of it, in which case you can make changes to it, but if I make changes to it and you pull those changes and my changes override yours, you have a merge conflict. So anyway, do make sure you check in that code when you're done with it if you've been following along with this tutorial. And I hope you learned a lot about like what Ionic is and what type of technologies it rests upon, what types of problems it solves, what makes it advantageous to use, and the basics of starting an app and using it, and its similarities and differences to standard web language of HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. So that's all. Thanks.